Okay, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. And if people can settle down, we'll start the next session. As you will see from the slide, we've had a slight change of program. The next speaker won't be Philip Lewis. It will be Michiel Karskens, who's from quite close by. So we're going to get a perspective from the consumer angle on the changes around energy efficiency and energy management. And I'm looking forward to, the next few presentations, which are going to broaden the conversation that we started this morning. And then we'll have a Q&A session starting at around 12 o'clock. So that'll be a chance for you to follow up on some of the questions, both from the earlier sessions and from these. So looking forward to that. But I will now hand over to Michiel. Michiel, thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'll be speaking a little bit about your right to privacy. I'm sorry for the whole change in rooms. You may be expecting somebody else to speak. If you're looking for Philip, I think he is in Iridium 1. That's where I was supposed to speak. And if you would like to go there, if there's anybody else sitting there that's looking for me, you could please send them over here. Little outline of my presentation. I'll start with a very brief introduction. Tell you a little bit about my organization, Consumers Union, and our role so far in the whole smart metering. Then I'll turn to data protection, what the issues are, continued by the impact of the current draft EU data protection regulation that was sent by the Commission, published January of this year. Then I'll talk a little bit about some of those consumer improvements, and I'll finalize with some conclusions. Then a little bit, the Consumentenbond, the Dutch Consumers Union. We were established in 1953. Next year we'll be celebrating our 60th anniversary. We're most well known for our publication, Consumer Reports. We also publish various other consumer magazines. We do independent product and services testing. We also provide service and advice in case our members run into trouble with a merchant. They can get legal assistance. And then we also do consumer advocacy, and that's the department in which I currently am employed. We have almost 500,000 members or Dutch households. And at present I am the Consumers Union's Manager of Public Affairs, which means that in my daily life I talk with Dutch politicians on various issues of consumer policy. Before I took this position, I was a policy advisor on energy, competition and trade policy, and in that regard I was also responsible for our campaign in relation to the Dutch law proposals on smart metering. You might know, I'll go very quickly through it. In 2008, the Dutch government sent a law proposal for a mandatory rollout of smart meters to Parliament. The Dutch DPA did an assessment of the law proposal and concluded that as far as it required that 15-minute values would be read, in all circumstances this was in conflict with the Dutch Data Protection Act. As a result, the Dutch Second Chamber, our House of Representatives, if you will, made some minor changes to the law, which came down to that energy suppliers would no longer receive 50-minute values, but instead they would receive daily values. And in addition, they introduced a 2-year trial period. But we believe that these changes were only marginal and not enough. And so we commissioned the Tilburg Institute for Law and Technology to do an assessment of the law proposal based on Article 8 of the European Treaty on Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. And we shared the results of that assessment with the Dutch Senate. who then came to vote down the law proposal. Well, technically they didn't vote it down. The secretary knew they were going to vote it down, so she withdrew it and drastically amended the legislation. The biggest changes were that from a mandatory rollout, it was turned into a voluntary rollout. As a consumer, you would get a right to refuse a smart meter. If you had a smart meter, you could also turn it, make it dumb, so to speak, so no communication. The new default, which used to be 50-minute values, now became only bi-monthly readings. And your explicit consent is required if you agree for the DSO or a supplier to receive any shorter intervals, so 50-minute values or hourly values. And at present, we're in the middle of the trial period, but there's still quite some debate and research going on, and that is all has to do with the so-called kill switch, which is one of the functionalities which is part of a smart meter. And there's a lot of debate now whether that should really be a part of it or it should be left out. Just a little bit on privacy and data protection. They're often used interchangeably, but with so much focus on information, the internet, a lot of people mistake informational privacy or data protection with the right of privacy. But privacy is much more an umbrella concept, having various dimensions of your civil rights. So privacy has a part on your control over your own body, bodily integrity. You have relational privacy. You are free to associate with whomever you want without interference of other institutions. And then there's also territorial privacy, the privacy you have over your private property, your home, so to speak. And then there's informational privacy, which is the data protection part. Then data protection. Yeah, why should you care about privacy and security for smart metering? Well, very simply, it can be the maker or breaker of your smart metering project. With smart metering, it's possible to collect huge amounts of data which say something about what goes on in a specific customer's house, what they are doing, when they are doing it, what kind of appliances they are using or are not using, when they use them, and so forth. The smaller the interval, the more revealing the data becomes. So from a bi-monthly reading, like just that single piece of data does not provide with too much information. You can make an estimate maybe on if it's a large or a little user. But the smaller you go to day values, you could assess whether somebody would be home or not. If you go to 50 minutes, like you can also start seeing more the autographs of specific appliances. There has been some research done in Germany where students proved that on the basis of 2-second intervals, they could see what television show or what movie was on television. So like the smaller the interval, the more revealing the data becomes. In January of 2012, the European Commission published the draft of a new general data protection regulation in order to build on and strengthen the provisions of the current data protection directive, 95/46 EC. And this regulation, once passed, and if, as it is, by the European Parliament and the Council, will become harmonized law for all member states. And in its current draft form, it contains a number of strong data protection provisions, including improved consumer or data subject rights and more transparency and accountability requirements for companies. I'll go through the major ones of, the regulation in total is over 100 pages, but I'll stick to the most important ones in relation to smart metering. First, the regulation clarifies and expands the concept of what is personal data. For example, various numerical online identifiers that can be connected to a person would be considered personal data. In the case of smart metering, you can think of the meter serial or the registration numbers. It introduces tighter controls on consent, and this is very important. As a ground for lawfully processing personal data, consent must be explicit and with onus on the controller, in this case the utility, to prove that it was properly given. Next to that, it also codifies some important principles, such as data protection by design and by default, including the concept of data minimization. And this is very important for smart meters. In addition to that, it is enhancing consumer rights through the provision of data portability. It gives you the right to take your historical energy consumption with you whenever you would switch, especially in the case of the UK, where of course the suppliers are the parties that roll out. Like if you would switch suppliers, you can take all your consumption data and take it to a different supplier. And it also introduces a new transparency principle with provisions for the types of information to be given. And it must be given in simple and understandable form. And there are mentions of layered privacy notices. And this is also particularly important for smart meters because as a utility, you will have to provide your customer with information on what the smart meter does, the frequency of the data collection, and other major parts of the meter. In case it has a kill switch or a functionality with which you can squeeze energy, you will have to inform the customer on this. In addition, the new regulation, which across the board strengthens data protection within the European Union. It also makes data controllers more accountable. And it also increases the responsibilities of data processors. For example, with regard to security, through obligations for privacy by design and default, and requirements to prove that they have obtained consent and also have certain processes in place. Then another major change is it increases the sanctions of data protection violations, and it gives organizations such as digital rights organizations and consumer organizations the right to complain or to take collective action for data breaches on behalf of individuals. So in other words, you can be sued collectively through one, for example, consumer organization on behalf of all your customers for a certain, in case of a data breach or non-compliance with data protection legislation. And then especially in connection to the other part, utilities will be obliged to notify a specific designated authorities in case of a data breach. And the regulation, in addition to that, provides prescriptive high fines for data breaches. So, in case you are hacked, you will be forced to inform authorities of this, and in addition to that, you will be fined for that, with possibilities for consumer organizations to sue for damages on behalf of the damage that you caused through the spreading of this information becoming public. And last but not least, the regulation makes it obligatory for privacy assessments for processing to be done for all that processing which is considered risky. So especially with regard of the smaller intervals. This is also, the privacy assessment is also part of the present EU recommendation. And currently there is a privacy impact assessment template being worked on by the European Commission, which I heard this morning should be published in February of next year. Now, all these provisions would have a positive effect on the impact of smart meter-related consumer data protection rights in comparison with the current laws, which is quite uneven across all the EU member states. This because the energy companies would be or will be legally obliged to improve, in particular, their practices with regards to information provisions, scope and legitimacy of data processing, as well be forced to obtain more meaningful consent from their customers for processing very detailed energy consumption data. Now, should the regulation be passed substantially in its present format, the actual impact, of course, would vary according to the practices in the different member states. I think that for the Netherlands, the impact of this new regulation would be relatively low because of our previous experience, the thresholds and all the regulations that have been introduced, which are very much in line with the new proposal. I think the impact of this regulation is relatively minor, but there are some other countries, for example, the UK, where I think the impact would be quite extensive, as in many of the other EU member states. Now, what's I think important to remember from a consumer perspective, like that it is all about trust. If you are introducing a smart meter in somebody's home, especially if you push a technology on them without them having any say about what is being placed in their house, of course you're going to meet some resistance. And if you live in an authoritarian regime, that doesn't really matter. I mean, you can whack them on the head and just continue business as usual. But if you live in a free and democratic society, you will have a problem. Now, we believe that it's very important to take on board privacy from the very inception of a smart metering project. Because if you do not, like, all kinds of processes are already in place, and you'll just be trying to working on the symptoms instead of addressing the core issues. And then such issues as privacy by design forces you to, from the very inception of your smart metering project, to include privacy rights, and in relation to that also, of course, security elements. Now, one example of what privacy by design, the implication of that for a smart meter, is that a smart meter will need to have a so-called log function. I mean, if it does not log what information is sent, when it is sent, what versions of software or patches are running on the smart meter, how can I ever, as an individual, assess what the technology is doing? As far as I know, there's not very many smart meters at present that have such a log function. As I said, at this moment, the European Commission is working on a template for a privacy impact assessment, which will be published at the beginning of next year. Well, this template is, of course, voluntary. But the draft regulation in Article 33 will make it obligatory to carry out such an assessment. And earlier this year, the European Data Protection Supervisor published its opinion on data protection, and it recommended that a freely given, specific, informed, and explicit consent must be required for all processing that goes beyond processing required for 1, the provision of energy, 2, the billing thereof, 3, the detection of fraud consisting of unpaid use of energy provided, and 4, preparation of aggregated data necessary for energy efficiency maintenance of the grid, the so-called forecasting and settlement. So anything more collected than that will require an explicit consent. At this moment, depending on the country we live, present legislation is kind of dubious and not equally implemented across the EU. But with the new draft regulation, that will no longer be an option. So I'll conclude very quickly. The draft regulation builds on the present legislation, strengthening consumer and citizen rights to privacy. It introduces new transparency rules and accountability rules. The regulation codifies some principles into law, such as data protection by design, by default, and data minimization. And in addition, it requires utilities to notify authorities in case of a data breach with prescriptive high fines for breaches. So in sum, if you're rolling out a smart meter and you haven't considered privacy or your consumers' right yet, and their right to data protection, you are way too late. And being too late, in event non-complying with legislation, will cost you dearly. Thank you. Questions now or later? Okay.